What's going on, everybody? Excuse the mess. My little office, which is normally neat and tidy, has become the staging area for a short film we're about to shoot, which has brought me to this video. So in this short film, we're going to have a night scene, and it is going to be lit primarily by lanterns and fire. So that brings me to the question of how to shoot this scene. I've been reading a lot about log and how log is not the best for shooting at night, that you should use a baked-in picture profile instead. Now, these new cameras, the R10, the R8, several of them have a mode called HDR PQ. There's no information about it. There's little information that creates more questions than answers. So I'm going to dive into this. I got a whole test set up. I'm going to walk you guys through it. Might be a little long, but we're going to get some answers here, and I'm going to share them with you guys. So log. Log stands for logarithmic, a logarithmic function that basically takes your image, desaturates it in camera so you get a higher dynamic range. Then you pull all that back out later. I'm not going to try and overcomplicate this, guys. Real simple, just follow along. So HDR PQ is a curve that focuses on colors the eye see well, gives them more data, takes data away from colors you can't see well. So this has me all wondering, would HDR PQ work better at night than using the burnt-in picture profile, not shooting log or PQ, just your standard tone on the camera, video mode, shoot it. So as I said, I've done a test. We have underexposed, properly exposed, and overexposed clips of log and clips of HDR PQ. Now, some of the things people say about HDR PQ is you cannot color grade it very well. And I've already blown that myth out of the water. You'll see that here. Another is that it doesn't handle highlights well. You'll see that as well. But it really kicks butt in the shadows. And I'm kind of torn. Anyways, let's dive into it. We have our C log. This is properly exposed, underexposed, and one stop overexposed, which for log is really properly exposed because you're supposed to overexpose it. Then we have HDR PQ, properly exposed, where it should be. One under, one over. I'm a little surprised the one over looks so close to the properly exposed, but according to the meter on back of my camera, this is properly exposed, this is one over, and you can kind of see it here in the highlights. So what have I set up? Let's just take a look at this without any color grade as it would look straight out of camera. Each clip is about 3 seconds. Now we're moving on to our HDR. All right, so as you can see, both profiles are kind of flat. Another thing you hear about HDR PQ is that it's made for special monitors, you know, HDR 10 plus monitors, that it's not going to look good if you don't put it on that monitor. Well, log doesn't look good either until you color correct it. So we have to color correct all this, get in a Rec 709 color space so it'll look good on any monitor. So I have set that up. Let's put our color correction back on. I'm going to walk you guys through this real fast. Just know I did a ton of research on how to get this to look right for the HDR PQ. But we will start with log. So our first node here is a color space transform. And we have input color space, Canon Cinema Gamut, input gamma, Canon log 3. We are outputting to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. So that is the first color transform node. Now we have another one further down in our flow of events here. And this is taking it out of DaVinci Wide Gamut and putting it in Rec 709. We're using the same node tree for log and for HDR PQ just to make it easy. So why this? I want to work in DaVinci Wide Gamut. That's where I want to do all of my color grading and everything. Then take it to Rec 709 because it's going to give me the most compatibility with the software and just being able to really tweak things. So how do we set this up for HDR PQ? The first node, we want Rec 2100, input gamma, Rec 2100 ST 2084. Output DaVinci Wide Gamut, output gamma, DaVinci Intermediate. Okay. That is the proper color space for importing this footage, and we're going to take it out to input Wide Gamut, Intermediate, output Rec 709, output gamma 2.4. I've done tons of research. This is what I found from Canon and DaVinci and some sites about just all this gobbledygook that people are going crazy over. So that's what you want to do to get your HDR PQ to look like this. If I turn those nodes off, that's what we got, that flat picture profile, just like you'd have with log. Ladies and gentlemen, we have lost our camera. Apparently my computer can't keep up, so it is strictly voiceover for the rest of this test. But we still have some really good information coming at you. Both HDR PQ and log are 10-bit file formats, which should give us excellent picture quality no matter what. So let's dive further into it and see what we got going on here. We have our 6 files. The first 3 are log. The second 3 are HDR PQ. We have our properly metered log, our under-metered log, and our overexposed, which is how log should be shot. And that's why it looks so good in this picture here. They recommend you overexpose log by half to 1 stop of light. On to HDR PQ. We have our properly exposed, which is how you should shoot PQ, is to properly meter it. We have our underexposed, and we have our +1. So let's dive into some shadows and highlights and see which images hold up the best. Let's go ahead and look at some highlight shadow detail. We're going to come over here to our underexposed log footage, and we're going to take the shadows up until I start the break. And I would say that's probably around 60. Let's go ahead and take them all the way up. So at 100, we do see quite a bit of noise, and I would say this is an unusable image. But back at around 60, it's not too bad. So we're going to do the same thing on our underexposed HDR PQ. Let's take our shadows up. And kind of the same thing, around 60, we're starting to see a decent amount of noise. At 100 though, it is handling better. There's a tiniest bit of color noise. Let's go back and forth here. Oh yeah. HDR PQ is handling the noise quite a bit better. The image looks a little more washed out, but we could bring a little contrast in there. And I would just say that's holding up quite a bit better on the shadow side. So that's a point for HDR PQ in the shadows. Now let's look at our overexposed, and we're going to drop our highlights. So this is our log overexposed, and we're just going to take our highlights all the way down. And as you can see, we get really good highlight recovery. Let's hop on over to the overexposed HDR PQ and drop the highlights all the way down. If you look here in the lower part of our door, the log did handle the highlights a lot better. So we're going to give a point there to log for highlights, and we got a point to HDR PQ for shadows. So that's kind of just looking at our highlight shadow recovery. Now we want to look at our 2 best images. So we have our overexposed log, which is the proper exposure for log, and we have our properly exposed PQ. So looking at these two clips, I've white balanced them, but I also did a color match just to bring them a little closer to working order, just with some light edits before we move on to our color grading adjustments. So I'm going to turn those on now. And we have a pretty well matched clip between the two. All right, so we're going to do some color grading and see how these images hold up. The first thing I'm going to do is just really kind of tweak them and see if I can't break the images, at what point they break. So let's play with our RGB. I'm just going to spin our red around the spectrum here. We're looking at our log footage. Reset that. Let's take our blue and our green. Not a whole lot of green in this image. We can see it on the clapper there. Reset. Just a little global adjustments. Everything looks like it's working as it should. We're going to do the same thing over here to HDR PQ. It is all looking pretty good to me. It is basically behaving in the same fashion. That's telling me we should have pretty good luck on color grading these images. Let's hop over here to log. And let's just try and get a nice, well-balanced image here. Gonna lift our shadows a little. Our highlights are already all the way down. A little more contrast. A little more saturation. And just a bright, poppy image there. We're going to copy that. Apply it to our adjustment tab. And I say they both look pretty good. Personally, I kind of like the look of the HDR PQ. It's just a little easier on the eye, a little less digital looking. Could bring down the gamma on the first, get them a little closer together. But that is not bad at all. Let's come back here and let's do a color grade. So we're going to go for a bleach bypass look. High contrast. Low saturation. Let's lift our mids a little. And that is a pretty nice look for a quick bleach bypass. We're going to copy that. And let's paste it over here. It's going to need a little bit of adjustments. Bring our gamma up a little more and let's hop back and forth. So we have a bleach bypass look on both, and they both look pretty good. So them saying that you can't color grade HDR PQ, I think it color grades very well. Let's go back to this, reset our adjustment clip, and let's go for some blue in the shadows, some orange in the highlights. Take our gamma down a little bit of a filament look there, orange teal, and let's copy that over. This one isn't quite as bright. Let's lift it a little bit. Orange teal, orange teal. Personally, once again, I like the look of that HDR PQ. Just looks a little more natural to me. I think it color grades very well. Let's go ahead and reset those. And let's do one more. Let's go for a hot day look. This is kind of quick and dirty here, guys. Don't want to take up too much of your time. And let's copy this one over. Ooh, I like that. Once again, I kind of like the color grade over here on the HDR PQ. They both look nice. Be happy to use either, but this whole thing, the HDR PQ doesn't grade well. I just don't really agree with that. Let's reset that. And I'm going to go for a look that I would use in a film, which is just kind of a two-tone look here. I'm going to desaturate a whole bunch of stuff. Take our cooler colors a little towards teal, our warmer colors a little towards orange. Bump the contrast quite a bit, take the saturation down a hair. And I want to take a little blue out of the highlights. A little red out of the shadows. Take the saturation down just a little more. And that is a look that I use a lot. That's kind of my take on the orange teal, just saturating the colors I really like. Kind of what I want to do for this Western. So let's take that, copy it over. And there we go. Very similar look. This one's a little brighter. So we'll make this one the match. And that is pretty good. Once again, just from personal taste, I'd have to take the saturation up a hair. But I kind of like the look of the HDR PQ. This isn't to dog log. I just think that they both have their place. If you're working with shadows, HDR PQ might be the way to go. So I'm going to turn off these adjustment layers. There's one more thing I want to do here. So now we're just looking back at the Rec 709, white balanced, color matched. Although I think our match got tweaked somewhere. Alright, that's pretty good for these purposes. And I want to put on my secret weapon. This is Dehancer. It's a film emulation software, and I use it all the time. And I want to see how it's going to hold up on log and how it's going to hold up on HDR PQ. And that's this last little tab I got going on over here. So we're going to open that effect, turn it on. I have my source as Rec 709. Let's refresh that. And it's automatically choosing Kodak Vision 3 250D. This is on our HDR PQ. Let's do the same thing over here. Refresh that. And Kodak Vision 3 250D. Let's hop between the two. And I would say it is applying a very similar look to both. I'm not going to go too in-depth into this. There will be a code linked in the description and a link to the site if you want to check out Dehancer. It is some amazing software, and if you use my code, you get a little discount. But let's just scroll through some of the presets here real quick to give you an idea. There's all kinds of things you can tweak with this, from halation, bloom, contrast, film grain. The film grain is what's really amazing. It just doesn't layer it over, it builds it from the ground up. And that pretty much is behaving as I would expect it to with log. I've always used it with log, it's always worked. Let's hop over here to HDR PQ and just look at some of the presets. And I would say that is working fairly good as well. All right, let's turn that back off. I lied to you guys. There's one more thing that I would like to show you. And this is probably what I think would be the biggest deal with using HDR PQ. Because we shot it HDR for an HDR TV and transformed it to Rec 709 for viewing on here, that's good and all, but we still shot this in HDR. And if we come over here to our HDR palette and we start messing with some of this stuff, it works way better than if you take log over here and do it. So we're in log now, and if we come over here and just do a real quick color grade on our log, say we want to leave our blacks black, take some saturation out of that, take our darks, push them a little towards blue, take our shadows a little towards blue, our lights a little towards orange, our highlights a little towards orange, desaturate our specular, and let's just play with these a little bit. So we're going to take our darks, move them to where we want them. Same thing with the shadows, same thing with the lights and our highlights. So there we have a, orange teal look. Let's do the same thing but with HDR PQ. And take some saturation out of our blacks and take our darks, push in a little blue. I have to change where they lay. Same thing with the shadows, push them a little towards blue. And this is just changing where on your histogram you're affecting this. A little more in the shadows. And take our lights, push them a little towards gold or orange. And take our highlights and do the same. I'll bring in a little more of the shadow. And we're going to drop our saturation and our specular. All right. We got an orange teal look, but to me, that looks, I don't know, it looks a little muddy, a little fake. Got orange teal look. That looks a lot more cinematic, a lot smoother transitions. And you can do a lot more with this in the HDR palette. But because this was recorded in HDR, and we didn't change that, we brought it over to the DaVinci wide gamut. We're working in wide gamut. We have better HDR controls. Also, if we ever wanted this footage to be exported to somebody for HDR content, for a HDR display, I mean, we're set up. That's how we recorded it. So, to answer my question, am I going to use HDR PQ when shooting this night scene? I don't know. I have to do more tests, unfortunately, because the scene is going to be very high dynamic range and there's going to be a lot of highlights in the fire of the torches and such. I don't know if HDR PQ is going to work any better than the baked-in profile, just because it's not handling highlights real well. Final thoughts on this whole thing. If you're going to be shooting and exposing for the shadows, working in the shadows, I see nothing wrong with using HDR PQ. I think it handles the shadows better, and I think you can color grade the heck out of it, and you can do some pretty neat HDR stuff. I have the feeling, just in my mind, that it looks just a little more cinematic as I'm color grading it. Log is still going to get you there most of the time. It's still the standard. It's what everybody uses. It's great, and it handles the highlights a heck of a lot better, just not so good in the shadows. So they both have their place. They're both good. They're both good for different reasons. I hope I've brought you some good information, and if nothing else, demystified HDR PQ and shown you how you can get it on your computer in a Rec 709 workspace looking good. All right, guys, sorry for this long video. I just thought this was really important to people who have Canon cameras with these choices. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You guys have a good day. And until next time, I am signing off.